Did the Rams get the steal of the draft? That's coming up on Locked On Rams.
You are Locked On Rams, your daily Los Angeles Rams podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Every single day, free and available wherever you get your podcast. My name is Doug McCain. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at DMAC_LA. And as always, I'm joined by the host of the Rams pre-half and post-game show on their flagship station, ESPN 710. He's entering his 8th season with the team, Mr. Travis Rogers. You can follow him on Twitter at Travis Rogers. And also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and drop some comments down below. But Travis, we might have the steal of the draft in Zach Evans. Ready to get into it?
I can't wait. Long time between the end of the season and where we are right now. I'm ready for games to start. So whatever we want to talk about now on Locked On, I'm ready to do it. Let's go.
Yeah, so as expected, we knew the draft, they were going to trade down. They were going to get multiple picks. Kind of one of the surprises, though, was they did trade up. They liked the guy enough to trade up in that draft to go get him. And McSnead and company, they trade the 252nd pick and a 6th-round pick in the 2024 draft to the Buffalo Bills for pick 215. And with that pick, they selected running back Zach Evans with the 38th pick in the 6th round. 5'11", 202 pounds. He has dealt with some injuries. He has dealt with some off-the-field stuff. We know he's a lottery ticket. You know, you never know if you're going to hit on this guy, but are you getting some steal vibes from Zach Evans?
Yeah, I think that it was a really interesting pick for the Rams because we saw what they were doing throughout most of the draft. We've seen what they've been able to do throughout the history of the McVay-Snead kind of collaboration, that more often than not, they tend to move back, collect more picks, take more players. We don't see them move up nearly as often. And this time they did. They saw a player that they liked, which I think is very encouraging for the Rams because this means they like the player. They like the talent. They like what they saw out of Zach Evans. I think they like the fact that this was a guy that was a very highly regarded player coming out of high school, one of the top recruited running backs in the entire nation, somebody that played in a big-time conference at Ole Miss in the SEC, had success against SEC teams. And look, this is the proverbial value pick, right? Somebody that was probably looked at as a higher pick by a lot of people. You look at some mocks, you saw some in the 5th, 4th, that he was one of those running backs that was kind of in that group past the top 1 or 2, the next 6 or 7, all kind of bunched together. They might have found a great deal of value in Evans down there in the 6th round.
Yeah, and I'm going to plant my flag right here and say that he is going to be the steal of the draft for the Rams. I love his talent. I love him as a runner. Very physical. He has the biggest hands in the draft. Would you know that out of the running back? So he plays above his weight, too. He's 202 pounds, and I think he plays faster than his 40 time, a 4.5 40 at the combine. But we know Travis. They are combine warriors, and then they're football players. They're guys that can run with pads, and he's not a guy that's going to take it to the house with elite speed, but he breaks tackles. He breaks out big runs, using that vision, using that patience, using that elite contact balance. And look, one number that really sticks out for me is 6.9 yards per carry in the SEC. So you see some detractors out there saying this guy doesn't have top end speed. Well, I saw he had no issues running away from SEC safeties and linebackers. And when we talked about on the show, guys coming from big programs, big conferences. So I definitely think he checks off a lot of boxes. But yeah, as far as his talent level goes, one comparison that I've seen out there is Melvin Gordon. But I watched pretty much hours, I wouldn't say hours, probably like 45 minutes of his highlights. And yes, you're just seeing highlights, but I saw a little of Todd Gurley in there. Is that a little crazy? Do you see some Todd Gurley in there with me?
Well, I think what you're seeing, whether it's Melvin Gordon or Todd Gurley or any of the other good backs we've seen come through this league, is you're seeing a good football player. And like you talked about, you talk about combine warriors, right? There are some guys that go out there in their underwear and look like Greek gods, that they're fast and they lift a lot and they do the shuttle run correctly and they do all of these other things. And that's great. That can tell you some things along the way. But me, I don't know if this is old school. I don't know if this is just me being more of an analog personality as opposed to in a digital age. He's a good football player. Todd Gurley was a good football player. Melvin Gordon's a good football player. They make guys miss. They're patient behind the line. They get the extra yard. They're able to create things when things aren't going exactly the way that they're supposed to be going, which I think is something the Rams have struggled with last year and something that they need to improve on. So I'm incredibly excited about him. I think that you're right. I think that there is some elements of his game that remind you of those other players, namely the ability to make things happen off a script, the ability to block, the ability to maybe catch the ball out of the backfield. There are some things that you see that you know that if you can bring those things to the table in a Sean McVay offense, you can really thrive.
Yeah, no, exactly. And he can do different things. He is a dynamic player. And yes, Todd Gurley, we know, we're talking about one of the best running backs at his peak in the last 10, 15 years when he was really going. Also ran behind a elite offensive line. So I think that's important as well. But I think Zach Evans, when you consider that they traded up for him, you're going to get some value out of that. Yeah, he was mocked in the 4th round. Yes, you could have taken him higher if everything broke right for him. So I definitely think this is a pick that Rams fans should be excited about, especially too when you know that Cam Akers, last year of his contract, not a lot of great running back depth. And I think, and we're going to talk about this later in the show, the importance of reestablishing that run game for this Rams offense. I think he's the guy to do it. I listened to his press conference with reporters, and he was saying that he was already going to ask the coaches for the playbook. So he's very excited to be here to get things going. And I think that, look, this was, like we said last week, a very sensible draft for the Rams, but it is nice to get some flashy players too, to get some running backs, some offensive weapons to kind of put around Matthew Stafford and hopefully bring that dynamic to kind of keep him vertical and just kind of reestablish some things. So I definitely think there is a really solid chance that he's going to have an impact this season. And I think too, there's a universe where he is a starter for the next 4 years or 4 years and having a big impact on this team.
Look, if there's one thing we've known about running backs in the draft is that they do not have to be picked high to be successful in the NFL. This is one of those positions where you can find value, where you can find players deep in the draft. And quite frankly, you find guys that are undrafted players that get signed after the draft that have a big impact. Now, if you can find a Todd Gurley in the 1st round, a Saquon Barkley, more power to you. Go take one of those guys, but there is value to be had. I think the one, if there's a red flag, maybe it's more pink than red, maybe it's not quite a huge deal, but this is somebody that has had trouble in places before, and maybe not big trouble, but we talk about the some of these other players that they're working here and they're doing this, and it's this perfect Horatio Alger story where you're getting towards the dream come true. This is somebody that's dealt with suspensions, that's had a transfer, that had trouble staying on his high school team, and the talent has always been there. The question has been, can you get that talent out and onto the field? And I think that's probably why he was there in the 6th round as opposed to coming off the board maybe a round or two earlier.
Yeah, and that is really how this team has kind of looked at the draft. They look at those flaws that might have some teams with their doubts and saying, oh, we don't want this guy because of this. He doesn't run this time. He doesn't look great at the combine. He doesn't run an electric 40 time. He's had some off-the-field issues. Well, we've heard Les Snead talk about football speed in the past, and running with pads is very different than running in the combine. So I think that they use those flaws to their advantage. I think anytime a guy transfers from TCU to Ole Miss and you're not seeing with the same program, he did have some character issues. That is only a bonus as far as trying to get value as far as talent and potential goes. So yeah, there's that. And also, how about the fact that he played with a lot of these players at TCU? He played with Steve Avila. I mean, he played with some of these guys, so that's definitely going to help him as well. And I think he is ready for this. I think that there is a world where, yes, you have Bijan Robinson right at the top, but we also know that when you look at those recruiting rankings, I mean, a few years ago, this guy looked like he was a lock to be a 1st or 2nd round pick. So I'm very excited about this pick. I think you needed another dynamic back, a guy that I think is going to have the fan base excited with his running style. And we know that this organization, you've had so many elite running backs through the years. And I think with the really uncertainty moving forward at that position, he fills a big hole. And I love the fact that they did go up for just one guy. They liked him enough to say, look, we want to be conservative. We want to fill these needs, but he's a guy we're going to move up for because we think that he's worth it. But yeah, we're going to talk about the state of the running back position and where he fits in. Can Zach Evans be RB1 or RB2 next season? We're going to get in that next here on Locked On Rams.
All right, before we do that, Doug, let's talk a little bit our pals at FanDuel, because right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to a $1,000. That's right. You heard me right. Up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. Here's the best part about FanDuel. You put the app on your phone and it's easy. It's just easy. It's safe. It's secure to get your money out, to get yourself paid. All of these things. There are great promotions every single day, and you get paid instantly. There is no better place to bet all of the NBA playoff action than America's #1 sports book. And had you gone to the Lakers a couple of days ago, you would have gotten some plus odds. Now, all of a sudden, after what happened last night, Lakers are the favorites in that series. So check it out every single day. Find that one that you like. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And thanks again for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single day. You everydayers, tomorrow on the show, we've been breaking down the draft all week long. We're going to take a look at another position group. We'll be doing a little defensive back, a little look at that secondary and where they go post Jalen Ramsey. That's coming up next on the next edition of Locked On Rams.
So we're going to dive into this running back picture here for the Rams, and we're going to talk about where does Zach Evans fit, because there's a chance I think he could have a big impact next season right away, right out of the gates. When you look at this running back picture, I think there's a good chance he could be RB2 right at the bat. What are your thoughts on that, Travis?
I think that there's a chance. I think one of the things that I've learned from watching Sean McVay over these last few years is that you just got to watch what he does, right? When he plays his guys in the preseason, I think it means that they're not really going to be a part of what they're doing during the regular season. So if he's on the field a lot during the preseason, I think that's going to be a tough putt for him. If they decide to pull him off of the field, I think you're going to have a much better idea there. We talked about Kyren Williams last year. This was somebody that the Rams had big plans for. This was somebody that I do think that they believed could backstop Cam Akers as that #2 person. And then very early in the season, he gets dinged up, and we never really got to see him until quite near the end of the season. And by that point, the season was gone. The season, you're running behind an offensive line that makeshift would have been a dream come true. Whatever 10 steps beyond makeshift is, that's what they were playing behind. You had quarterbacks that were not of NFL quality for a good portion of that season, and you never got a good look at Kyren Williams. I think Williams is almost starting at square one as well. I think Cam Akers, and we'll talk about him coming up in just a little bit, is clearly the #1 guy, miraculously, after what they went through last year. But Williams and what you have in Zach Evans, I think there's going to be a competition there. I know that the Rams really like Kyren Williams. I just don't know if they know what they have in Kyren Williams. And we know this is the league of next man up. This is the league of, if you can do it, you're going to play. If you get somebody else an opportunity and they do better than you, tough luck, sit down, go find another team. This is a ruthless, cold-blooded league. Evans definitely has a chance to get on the field, but he's got to make an impact pretty early, because I do know that the Rams like Williams.
Yeah, he has to prove himself, but I think there's a pecking order, and Williams is going to get that opportunity. He is going to get a runway to prove that he can be that guy. Because, look, he suffered injuries all throughout last season. I mean, he broke his foot in the offseason, had a slow rehab. Then he suffered that ankle injury on special teams in week 1. So he really didn't get that chance to be healthy and show what he can do. Now, he's another guy we're just talking about 40 times. People were saying he doesn't have that burst. I mean, we're talking about another 4.5 40 guy, but he's a physical runner. He's a guy that is great in pass protection, so I definitely think it is paramount to keep Matt Stafford vertical, so that is another role that he can help. But if you look at his numbers, there's really nothing that says, okay, it screams, oh, Williams is a guy that can go out there and be him, as they say. 35 carries for 139 yards. His longest run was for 15 yards. So really, we haven't seen much to say, oh, that is his spot. You can just pencil him in there. And I think, too, you look at Evans, he brings the upside that I just don't think that Williams has. So for me, I mean, we can debate about this. I like Williams. I like Evans as my guy over Williams heading into next season, just because of the big play ability, because of how dynamic that he can be. But I agree with you 100%. I think Williams, to start the year, they are going to give him an opportunity to see what he can do. And last year was just a weird year for the running back position. I mean, so much drama with Cam Akers, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. But if you look at, they waived Darrell Henderson, they waived Jake Funk. You had Ronnie Rivers and Williams really as guys that they had to turn to. Do you think that the fact that there was so much chaos at the running back position last year. Do you think that kind of impacted everything? And do you think that they're going to have some more stability this season?
I think they have to. I think that they have to have some sense of who's going to be in that position more often than not. And, Doug, you were talking about the fact that Evans does have big playability, and he does, and that's great. But I know for a fact that Sean McVay wants to make sure, and you mentioned this as well, this is why a player like Todd Gurley was so important. This is why Cam Akers, when he's playing at his best, can be a real difference maker. And it's that pass protection, that this is something that is probably the number one priority that you have. This is something that typically comes later in a young running back's career, understanding the protections, understanding the assignments and those things in the blink of an eye, because you can't miss it once and say, oh, okay, I learned my lesson. You miss it once, and that's Matthew Stafford back on the rack for another couple of months. You miss it once, and it could be a season-altering sort of injury situation. So pass protection, I think, is going to be at the top of the list, but I do think you're right. I think that there needs to be some calming of the waters at that position. It was the Rams had a terrible season last year. It was tumultuous for a million different reasons, but the running back room was at the top of that list. It started with Cam Akers, who was supposed to be the starter. We know that he got benched, he got sent home, he came back, he was awesome. So I think everybody, Akers included, is kind of just looking to hit that reset button and start over.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think that you got to just kind of hit that reset, get healthy, and see where things go. I do think Williams lacks that explosion that I like to see. I think that Evans is coming to take his spot, but I still think that, yeah, he does bring something to the table that
and I like what you said too, that competition is good, right? That this is you want two good guys for one spot. That's ideal. The idea isn't picking between two guys, like which one is slightly less crappy than the other. That's the worst possible position. The best position is both of these guys can play, but this guy does one thing a little bit better. It's the different flavors of ice cream philosophy, right? I like this a little bit more than that, but they're both really good. So give me this one on this day. I think having both of those guys, Kyren Williams and Zach Evans, and by the way, both of them pushing Cam Akers to be a better running back, I think ultimately helps everybody in that room, ultimately helps everybody on that team.
Yeah, I think Williams, too, getting healthy, getting his speed back. I mean, I watched a run yesterday, a 90-yard run when he's with Notre Dame, one of the best runs really I've seen at the college level, 4 yards per carry. So, yeah, we'll give him a chance, but I'm definitely excited to see, like you said, the competition. We have a legit competition for that RB2 spot. I think it's going to be one of the more exciting storylines to watch when we get things going. But in our last segment, we're going to talk about Cam Akers and why the Rams need to really reestablish and focus on the run next season.
Thanks for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single day. For all you everydayers, tomorrow on the show, we're going to talk a little secondary, a little defensive back, and what life looks like after Jalen Ramsey. And Doug, not to put it too far ahead of us for our everydayers, but you and I, we need to have a Dodger-Ram discussion at some point too. So that's something to look forward to on a future edition of Locked On Rams.
So in our last segment today, we're going to talk about Cam Akers and the importance of reestablishing this run game for the Rams, because last year there was so much drama between Cam Akers and this organization. It looked like he was going to be a lock to be traded. Mm-hmm. He ends up staying. They kiss and make up, and he has a strong finish to the year, 3 100-yard games. But the first question I have for you, Travis, is do you think this relationship between Cam Akers and the organization is too fractured heading into this final year of his contract, or do you think they can bury the hatchet and be productive for his final season, presumably in LA?
I think everybody came out of that last year. I think if there's one bright spot with what happened last year, it's that I think Sean McVay learned something, and I think Cam Akers really learned something. And that is, even if there's a little bit of friction between one group and one coach and one player, that it ultimately is in everybody's best interest to kind of put it aside and move forward. You just said it, Doug. This is Cam Akers last year on this contract. The market for Cam Akers last year at the trade deadline didn't exist. There wasn't anybody that was dying to have him on their team, or certainly nobody that was dying to have him at any sort of price that the Rams were willing to give him away for. He needs to play well if he wants a contract, whether that be in Los Angeles or one of the 31 other teams in this league. So he needs to play well, if for no other reason in his own self-interest. I think Sean McVay also realized that getting into a staring contest with one of the players that you have to absolutely have may not be a great idea. I understand that he needed to make it clear that he was in charge of the football team, that he needed to make it clear that you can't blow up his practice and make it about you. And I can respect where the position he was in. The Rams were better. When he came back, they were better. They weren't good, but that wasn't because the running back position wasn't performing at a high level. They finally got that position going. They finally were able to look like at least a functioning NFL team, despite the fact that the offensive line was bad, despite the fact that their quarterback play was all over the map. Like you mentioned, the Rams didn't even have a 70-yard rusher until the last month of the season, and then Cam Akers really got going, put up one over 70 yards and a couple of games over 100 yards towards the end. They need to get over it. They have to get over it because the Rams offense at its best features a back that not only can run the ball, but catches the ball out of the backfield. And like we talked about before, knows how to pick up a block.
Yeah, no, I think you make a great point there, and you say that, look, when he was going to be traded, there was no market for him, okay? I mean, why would a team trade assets for a guy that's about to be cut? So I think really last season was just about the Rams knew that they weren't going to get anything of value for him, and they said, look, I mean, he still can provide a big boost to this running game because, look, his talent is still undeniable. You saw him flash in those final 3 games. I mean, the run that sticks out for me is the 42-yard run he had against the Chargers. Travis, that was their only 40-yard or more run for the entire season. So they lacked explosion from that position. He's a guy, a 4.47 40. We're talking about 40 times because of the draft. He still has that burst. And I think more time removed from that Achilles tear, from those injuries, I think you could see him have his best year as a Ram next year because we know going into contract years, that is where players, they really turn it on. So I definitely think expectation-wise, I expect him to have a big year because I think he's going to be as healthy as he's ever been. I think that he's going to be as incentivized and motivated as he's ever been. And I think there's a chance that he's going to get himself a big payday. And if he does that, you get the Rams a comp pick. So I want to see a little compensation pick out of my man Cam Akers. But what are your expectations for him for next year?
I think that he's going to be very good for no other reason than he needs to be, for his own benefit, for the team's benefit. Well, may just be, one of those residual benefits that he needs to play in this league, right? There are only so many jobs that you can get in this league that pay what they pay. Otherwise, you're back doing something. They're XFL, you're USFL, you're Canadian. This is the spot to be if you play football. And he saw the other side. He saw what the market was for him, and he needs to get it going. The Rams need to have him get it going. So my expectations for him are high, modestly high, I should say, because I don't know if he's a dynamic back like, maybe some of the better ones in the league, but he's certainly good enough, and he certainly fits into what the Rams do well. So I'm optimistic if he can stay healthy and he can stay, motivated and focused, that he could have a very nice year.
Yeah, you talked about lessons that Sean McVay learned from Cam Akers in that situation. I think another lesson that they learned is this is a prime example of when you go away from a running back by committee system and you give a guy that has the talent of a Cam Akers uninterrupted touches, good things can happen. So I'm expecting big things, but we'll tie a little bow on this segment by ending on the importance of the Rams to reestablishing the run for next season, because last year they were towards the bottom in essentially every single rushing category. 4 yards per carry, that was 28 out of 32. 1,661 yards total, that was 27 out of 32. So towards the bottom in every single running category. To start the year, they were historically bad. And in today's NFL, you start to see teams start to zig and go back to that running game. I mean, with the 2 high safety looks to stop those explosive plays, you're not seeing those big linebackers, those run stuffers. You're seeing teams take advantage of these lighter box. My question to you is, how important do you think it is for the Rams to reestablish that running game?
Well, it's interesting. This sounds crazy because the Rams have been to the Super Bowl twice in the Sean McVay era. They have a Super Bowl championship just a couple of years ago with Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford. But the fact of the matter is, we haven't seen the Rams offense at its best yet, in my opinion. We have seen them when they have a dynamic running back like Todd Gurley who can run, who can catch, and who can block, right? We've seen that, but the quarterback position at that point with Jared Goff was maybe a little bit less than you would ideally want. Then we saw what it looked like with Matthew Stafford, where your quarterback play was at an incredibly high level. You had guys like Cooper Kupp and Odell Beckham Jr. playing at an incredibly high level, and they were able to do a bunch of things through the passing game. but the running game virtually went away and didn't exist anymore. We're still looking for that offense that has high-level quarterback play, with Matthew Stafford is still currently capable of doing, and then that running back play. It doesn't have to be Gurley level. Ideally, sure, it would be, but somebody that can do all of those things. We've seen one or the other. We haven't seen both at the same time yet, and if you can, for all those reasons that you talked about, how this thing tends to swing back and forth from passing heavy to running heavy to more balanced attack to teams trying to prevent big plays. I think that if you can get a balance of some of that, Sean McVay always says we went away from the run too early. It's because they have to. If they can get some of those balancing plays back in the mix the way that we saw with Todd Gurley, look out, because we still haven't seen that McVay offense at its best, despite how good it's been.
Yeah, and that's really interesting to me. And I also want to say I love the amount of times that Todd Gurley has been mentioned on today's show. It kind of has me in the feels a little bit. And with Todd Gurley, that is when this offense was at its best. When you had a dominant running game, when you had a great offensive line, and you were setting up that play action pass. We know Matthew Stafford, since his days from Detroit till now, he's top 11 in the league when it comes to play action pass efficiency, making big explosive plays. And the question I have, though, is, look, of course, you had a 5-game stretch to end 2020 with Cam Akers. You had Sony Michel last year in December. Since 2019, the run game has been a problem. And I think that you want to see Sean McVay. He wants to get back to that zone run scheme. I just don't think he has the talent to do that. And the question I have for you is, should we start questioning Sean McVay's ability to have a successful running game?
I think it's a fair question, and I think it is a question that we'll have an answer to when he has more of a complete hand to play, right? Last year is a really tough year to use as any sort of evaluation on whether or not he knows how to use the running. The offensive line was so broken. The quarterback play was so bad that it's difficult to evaluate using last season. I think a better one is the one, and again, it sounds weird to say it, the year they won the Super Bowl. They basically did it with Sony Michel, who was good, but far from great. And when that passing game is cranked up to the level that it was in their Super Bowl championship year, they still didn't run the ball very much. I think that is a better question to be asked of when the offensive line was good and healthy and functioning, when your quarterback was good and healthy and functioning, and you had weapons all over the field, you still didn't run the ball all that much. I think that's the question that we should be asking.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think that it's tough to judge this team because they were so devoid of talent on the offensive line. They were so banged up. We know it was going to be possibly a transitional year, but I do think that this season, I want to see how this running game performs, because I'm starting to wonder if Sean McVay really needs to go to more of a power run at some point, take advantage of these smaller, lighter players and really the direction that the game is heading. But yeah, we'll see how this fares out. But I do love Zach Evans as a steal. I think this running game is one of the big storylines heading into next season. I think we're going to get a big bounce back year from Cam Akers. But tomorrow we're going to touch on the cornerback position. Should the Rams have drafted a cornerback higher? Are they set at that position? Where are the holes? Where are they going to really have to fix before it starts? We're going to head into that next. Actually, should I plug that for us? Or did you want to?
No, that's perfect. That's perfect.
Okay. All right, I'll pick up there because I didn't know if you wanted that.
Nope.
Okay.
Perfect.
But tomorrow we're going to touch on the cornerback position. Did the Rams do enough at that position? What are they going to do at outside corner? We're going to talk about that position tomorrow on Locked On Rams.